Hello everyone, your friendly neighborhood spider fanboy here to bring you a new What If video. Decided to jump back into Bleach with What If Ichigo was given his Asauchi early. So basically, we're gonna give him his true Sanpakuto a lot earlier, but we're gonna be changing a lot of things. It's gonna have a lot of ramifications. So basically, is that how it'll start is that Kisuke through his usual Kisuke means, will get his hands on an Aosouchi, a blank Zanpakuto to give to Ichigo throughout his training for those couple of days before he heads to Seirukia. So everything up until, his battle, or everything up until he wakes up at Kisuke's shop is exactly the same. Everything with, basically the what is it called? I think it's just called just the substitute Soul Reaper arc. So like throughout that whole little arc, everything's the same. All of his friends getting their powers, all that stuff. Everything's all the same. It changes when he begins the encroaching process, or yeah, I would say it changes when he starts the encroaching process. He goes through holification. So when he's sent into that pit, um, Urahara just kind of tosses down a sword, and he tells him that in order to claim his Soul Reaper powers, um, his true Soul Reaper powers, he's going to need a Sanpakuto of his own. And if he wants to claim that Sanpakuto as his own, he needs to free himself before the encroachment, um, gets to his chest, before his chain of fate completely encroaches and he holifies. He needs to break free, find his Soul Reaper powers within, and claim the blank Sanpakuto in front of him. And when he gets pulled into his inner world, the presence of a proper Sanpakuto is going to kind of throw a wrench into Old Man Zangetsu, or as we know, thanks to the Thousand Year Blood War arc. And I'm mainly saying that because I already know about the manga, but I know some people didn't go through with the manga with reading the final arc of the manga even after all these years. So Thousand Year Blood War is animated, so you don't have any excuse anymore. We know that Old Man Zangetsu is Yuhavak, or at least a fragmentation of him. Same how in every Quincy there's a fragment of him, just a little bit of his own essence, and it's kind of become its own individual at this point. So it can't act as Ichigo's Soul Reaper powers if he claims the true Sanpakuto. So he ends up making a decision, and rather than Ichigo only meeting Old Man Zangetsu, he meets Old Man Zangetsu, who is kind of chilling in the background, and he's confronted by White Zangetsu, his true Sanpakuto, and the source of his Shinigami and Hollow powers. Um, White Zangetsu kind of mocks him for the whole situation that he's gotten himself into, and Ichigo himself is completely lost. He's not sure which one of them is supposed to be a Sanpakuto spirit, and when he asks them for their names, they White, he says Zangetsu, and Ichigo says he can't hear anything, and he even turns to the old man, and he says, "What's your name? What about you?" And he also tries to say Zangetsu, which kind of gets White a little mad. Ichigo notices. Um, but Zangetsu says, "Look, none of that matters right now. You really want to be able to. Right now, you need to get yourself out of the situation. Because if you don't, I'm gonna take control." And that gets Ichigo confused. He's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he's like, "Look, we don't have a lot of time. You want to win? You want to claim the power for yourself? You want to be the one on top, the one in control? Then you need to get going right now." And Ichigo does eventually, like in canon, he does find the box with his Soul Reaper powers within. But he also finds a second box next to it. When he feels out with the spirit ribbons, I think it's the red one is for Shinigami. So hold on, spirit ribbons. I know, I know red is Um, red is for Shinigami, but I don't know if there's any other if any other species have their own specific colors. I know it's like white for humans, red for yeah. So Shinigami Zeraku is red, while those of other beings are white. So basically, he comes across two boxes. The one being the one that he's looking for is the one where white is from. It's the powers of his hollow slash Shinigami powers. The power of white, his true Sanpakuto. But next to it is a smaller box that has just a hint, rather than it being a completely different color, I would say it has a slight tint to it. That human species like Fullbringers and Quincy's, they would have a tint to their white ribbon. So he sees a white ribbon with blue as well, and the bluish white ribbon is kind of intertwined with his red ribbon. And seeing this, he's kind of confused, but it doesn't stop him from reaching into the red box with his right hand and subconsciously reaching into the smaller box with his left. He grasps onto both of them, and as he does, before him, both that white version of himself and the old man in the cloak and glasses briefly appear before him. And both of them have smiles on their faces. Well, it's a bit of a bit of a mad grin on White Zangetsu's face because we all know how he is, and a subtle smirk on Old Man Zangetsu's face. But nonetheless, he can tell that they're both pleased. And in the real world, the scene seems somewhat similar to everyone else. But while he does have that hollow mask, rather than having his old oversized Zanpakuto over his shoulder, when the dust clears, everyone sees that he has the hollow mask and that on his strapped around his waist, he has two blades. One is a standard length katana that's straightened out. I think it's called the Daito. Right? Let me see. Daito katana. Or yeah. Okay, so a katana is a type of Daito sword. Okay, so yeah. Basically, one of them's a katana, standard length. The other is a wakizashi, I believe it's called. A wakizashi, which is a shorter length in comparison to the yeah, they're shorter in length in comparison to standard katanas. So yeah, he has one that's long and or one that's standard, basically what you would envision. Think about just Tensa Zangetsu, how it looked like before. Um, Same overall design and length. It's a straight katana rather than having the curve. And it does have the chain. The hilt is still black, but the blade itself probably won't be. Because I do know that all Sanpakuto, they do have like personalized designs even in their sealed state, specifically like with their hilts. But they do have some similarities in that, oddly enough, I think it's like their hilts are all the same color, like this weird tannish metallic color. So basically, just Tensa Zangetsu, but not white, or but not black. Only the wrapping for the handle and the chain is black, but everything else looks a little bit more standard. And the wakizashi itself is a smaller curved blade, but it also has a similar design. It still has that same hilt that Tensa Zangetsu has, the curved one that kind of is squared. I don't really know what it's called. Hold on. Tensa Zangetsu, not hilt. Guard. The guard. I think it's called like a Suba. Yeah. It's it looks similar to what we know as a swastika, but I think it goes in the other direction. But I know it has like a name in Japanese. Like the shape itself, it looks like a reverse swastika. You know what I'm talking about. Just look up Tensa Zangetsu, look at the guard, the Suba, and it has that same shape on both of the blades. So yeah, he has a katana and a wakizashi. He's dual wielding already, even in his Zanpakuto sealed state. And then he rather than shattering the mask, he kind of just calmly takes it off and he looks at it for a second, cause like in his mind, as he looks at it, he's kind of confused. He thinks it might be kind of leftover from what he kind of just went through, nearly holifying. But deep inside, he feels like at a tug at his gut, some kind of warmth that radiates not just from the mask but from his longer blade as well. Noticing this, he kind of puts the mask down and kind of settles it on his waist rather than destroying it. It's not really going to be doing anything right now, so don't worry about that. He's not going to immediately have access to holification, but he doesn't outright destroy the mask. He just kind of sets it down on his waist. Um, and he ends up, walking up, and Kisuke congratulates him, and they move on to the next step where Kisuke kind of just nearly murders Ichigo a couple times. Ichigo is able to fend off a lot better. Um, he's able because he actually has blades now rather than just the hilt and that broken bit of blade left. He actually has his two blades, and he tries experimenting. And Kisuke kind of lets him. He kind of lets him experiment with the fact that he now has two blades, but it doesn't last long, and he eventually does start upping the ante, and that gets Ichigo intimidated, and he does start running a little bit like he did in canon. He does go for a couple sword strikes here and there, but he quickly realizes how futile it is to try to clash blades with Kisuke with how overwhelmingly powerful he is. Maybe he lasts like he shows off an impressive display. He adjusts to his two blades pretty quickly, but just as quickly he's thrown on his ass. So we do end up in a similar scene where Kisuke is pushing him into a corner, and in Ichigo's mind, both of the both sides of Zangetsu, both of his spirits, manifest, and they give him a very similar speech, but they kind of bounce him. They kind of bounce back and forth between the lines, with White being a lot more aggressive and making it clear that if he dies, he's gonna take control, and he'll just kill this guy for Ichigo. But if he continues showing off how pathetic he is, he'll just take control from here on out, and it'll be his show. And it's kind of his own way of saying, if you want to be able to save Rukia, if you want to be able to protect the people you care about, because they're not my priority. I have my own priorities. So if you want me to focus my efforts on your priorities, you're gonna have to show a lot. You're gonna have to make a better showing than this. So stand your ground. And that's where Old Man Zangetsu, he takes over from there and launches into his don't hesitate, never back down. What is it? Hold on. I love the line, Old Man Zangetsu, do not hesitate. Or what is it? Hesitate. What was his speech? Abandon your fear, look forward, move forward, and never stop. You'll age if you pull back, you'll die if you hesitate. He gives that speech, and in response, White even says, "Hey." White kind of jumps in and says, "Because if you die, I'll be sure to take control." He just keeps throwing that crap in there like he does in canon. And this gets Ichigo to turn around, and rather than just raising one blade, he ends up calling upon both of them. He raises them both up, and he calls out their name, Zangetsu. And when he ends up slashing, he is able to deliver a Getsuga Jujisho. It's nameless. He doesn't know the name of the technique, but he does unleash a Getsuga Jujisho, which is a lot more devastatingly powerful. And another thing, he's just more powerful in general, because Old Man Zangetsu isn't holding back true Zangetsu. Um, with the presence of a proper Asauchi, he wouldn't have a chance. True Zangetsu would be able to latch onto it and manifest through it. So he has no way of holding back White Zangetsu. So here he is devastatingly more powerful, and Kisuke very much realizes that. Not only is his hat cut off and destroyed into bits, which he does kind of pout a little, but as he brings his fingers up to his chest, it's faint. He was able to increase his own power just in time to to be able to clash with it, but he pulls his fingers up from his chest. He has thin lines of blood in an X shape across his chest. And he already knows Ichigo's gonna be getting very powerful very quickly. So from there, the training will kind of be somewhat similar. It's mainly just that Ichigo, with a proper Zanpakuto, is stronger. He has more Ryatsu, or yeah, he has more spiritual power to work with, and with a proper vessel, like with a proper tool to channel his power, with a proper Zanpakuto, rather than having to rely on old man Zangetsu struggling to hold back a white and play the part as his Zanpakuto instead of his Quincy powers. Ichigo actually is gonna have a, despite having more power, he's probably gonna have a bit of an easier time with controlling it because now he has a proper. I think like when Uryu and Ichigo were facing off against the Gillian, he was like, "Oh, his power's like a water spout, but he's always on full blast." But like now he has a proper valve that he can control of his own free will. It's not old man Zangetsu trying to act as the valve and occasionally losing control to White whenever Ichigo's in grave danger. Instead, Ichigo has a proper valve that he can use to properly regulate his own power. And it's completely in his own control. So he doesn't have to worry, he's not going to have to worry too much about controlling his powers. He'll have slip ups here and there because he does have greater amounts of power. But all in all, things are already changing, and Kisuke has noticed that Ichigo is progressing very quickly with the usage of his dual blades, the two large cleavers. One is smaller than the other, he notes, and he very quickly comes up with a hypothesis that is very much correct. The smaller blade is the representation of his Quincy powers, with the larger blade being the merged Hollow and Shinigami powers within. And he thinks it's interesting that he's able to manifest a dual wield Zanpakuto with one of them taking on his Quincy nature. One second. He probably would have thought maybe he would have had a normal Zanpakuto or somewhat normal hollowified Zanpakuto, and if he could have ever predicted a dual wield, he probably would have thought it would have been split between Shinigami and Hollow. But he supposes it does make a bit of sense. He's never really known of a Quincy becoming a Shinigami, so he's kind of curious to see how his abilities will continue to develop. But anyway, things do continue along pretty well. Hold on, I want to make sure that I have a proper timeline pulled up. But yeah, things would continue similarly enough. Chad, Orihime, they both meet up with Yoruichi, and Uryu still shows up with the glove that allows him to use the let stilts, the precursor to Volstandig. So he still has that glove, that training glove, that's going to give him a pretty decent increase in power. Yeah. So the training is going to be just about the same, and they all eventually meet up at the firework festival before they finally head out after relaxing for a week. And I would say during that week, just because a lot of Ichigo's journey was very heavily impacted by the fact that he knew nothing about himself. The majority of the story, the way he evolved with his powers and how he learned to grasp them and how he learned to control them. A lot of his troubles was because he knew nothing. But right from the beginning, even if he doesn't have all the answers, he's met with both halves of himself, both sides of himself. Now, they haven't outright stated, oh, like White hasn't said, I'm your Hollow and Shinigami powers, by the way, your mom's the Quincy, that's the representation of your Quincy powers, and he's also technically the god of Quincy's, but don't worry about it. Like, they're not doing anything like that. They're not going to make things easy for Ichigo and just give him all the answers. but they do tend to nudge him in the right direction. White might be a little bit of an ass about it, but Old Man Zangetsu is as cryptic as ever. But here they're kind of forced into working with one another, kind of like how they did throughout the series, where White was obviously a lot more reluctant at times, but here they're kind of forced into working with one another, and in order to help Ichigo grow and gain in strength, and it is working. Ichigo is progressing. Just his sheer skill, his Zanjutsu proficiency, his ability to wield his Zanpakutos, just in battle in swordplay, he's shown off how quickly he can progress. He's already very powerful. He's already adjusted to his dual wielding, to the fact that he has two blades. So yeah, eventually they all do head out to Soul Society, and nothing changes too much at first. They do battle against battle. Ichigo kind of just takes care of Jidambo. He does still get sent back by Gin because while he is stronger, it's not like he has all of his powers right off the gate. So maybe he struggles for a minute in place when Gin sends out his Sanpakuto, tells Shinso to kill Shinso. I think that's what it is. Um, Maybe he like stands in place, crosses both of his blades together directly in front of him, and like a part of him is like he's almost raring to go. He can feel he's ready to collect his Reishi and unleash another nameless Getsuga Jujisho just in retaliation, but his concentration is broken by the fact that Shinso starts pushing even harder against him. He is still sent back. The gate closes, and they have to meet up with the Shibas. Blah 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 blah. They do still end up in that cannon. Now, Ichigo is still young in his recent proficiency with trying to control his spiritual power, so he does still fluctuate for just a moment, and that is still enough to send them all off. So, and honestly, I really just want to get into the same fights because I like them a lot. Specifically, Ichigo versus Ikaku, and this is where things get very interesting when Ichigo is able to handle Ikaku with a laughable ease. Like he walks away with maybe a scratch or two, whereas Ikaku is kind of just completely exhausted on the ground. He's bloodied, he's battered. Ichigo kind of felt bad that he kind of went a little too far on him, and straight up just slashed through his Sanpakuto. He slashed through his threefold spear, just slashed through right in the middle of it with his bigger half of Zangetsu, and yeah, he kind of just leaves him on the floor, and he moves on. And the biggest change comes when Ichigo has his rematch with Renji. This is when Ichigo begins to show off just how much more powerful he is in comparison to Kanon. When Renji ends up activating Zabimaru, Ichigo decides to kind of taunt him a little bit. He says he'll only use one of his blades, and he's going to be using the shorter one. And of course, that gets Renji pissed. So they end up getting to fighting, and Ichigo is kind of holding his own similarly to how he did in Kanon in the beginning, but eventually he can feel, okay, maybe he should take this a little bit more seriously, and he pulls out the larger half of Zangetsu. And this gets Renji a little intimidated because at this point they've been somewhat even, but now Ichigo is about to show off just how much he's grown when he begins to tear through Zabimaru. He's causing cracks in its structure in the various pieces of it, even when it's just striking at the end point. Like Renji will send Zabimaru out, it'll extend. Ichigo will deflect it with his larger blade, and taking a page out of Renji's book, he'll throw his smaller Zangetsu directly towards Renji, and one of the wrappings of it will have wrapped around his own hand, and Renji's kind of caught off guard. He's like, "What the hell is this idiot doing?" Throwing his Zanpakuto like that, and he pulls Zabimaru back to try to deflect it. It curves through the air to try to deflect the smaller Zangetsu, but Ichigo throws the larger Zangetsu to kind of pin the cables of Zabimaru directly into the floor or maybe a wall a couple feet away. He's able to pin it by stabbing into it and tossing it, and the ribbon also wraps around his right hand. And the smaller Zangetsu um, damn near pierces through his shoulder. He has to kind of move out of the way, and it kind of cuts into his shoulder a little bit. And but he's like, this idiot's finished. He just threw both of his Zanpakuto. Now I just have to release. Now I just have to get Zabimaru out of there. But he's shocked when the blade pulls back and slices him on the back of his shoulder this time. And Ichigo, he sees that Ichigo is able to use the ribbons of his of wrapped around his Zanpakuto, and Ichigo begins spinning the smaller one, and then he pulls out the larger Zangetsu, catches it in his hand while he's still spinning the smaller Zangetsu, and he tells Renji that he's not the only one with ranged attacks. He better pull something else out, or else he's not gonna win this battle. Um, they end up being pushed into a similar clash, although Renji is definitely much more desperate as he has his damaged Zabimaru, whereas Ichigo is in pretty decent condition. And Ichigo calls out for the first time just a Getsuga Tensho. He decides to pull back on the strength of his attack. Uh, he ends up placing the larger Zangetsu back on his back and just releases a blue and white Getsuga Tensho. In response to, I forgot what attack Renji actually used in their final clash, but I do know in canon it caused him a pretty decent blow. This time Ichigo's in a little bit better shape. He's still gonna end up collapsing, but he's gonna make it a lot farther when he walks away from the battle, and he does get some help. He does get some help from Hanataro. Forgot about him, honestly. He's a pretty forgettable character at times. But yeah, when he ends up waking up from the fight and he once again finds that mask, here it's not all broken. It's in pristine condition, and it's the same complete mask. This time there's a few more stripes he notices, rather than the original. I think it was like what he only had like three markings when he first grabbed it. Now it already has like four, and he can feel once again like the same warmth that pulsates not just from the mask but from the larger half of Zangetsu. And he's like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to have some kind of talk at one point, but for now I'm just gonna go on ahead and ignore it like I do with a lot of problems. Classic Ichigo. So he ends up hooking the mask back onto his waist, and he ends up leaving and runs into the absolute monster that is Kenpachi Zaraki, and this is where things change the most. So Kenpachi finds Ichigo, as while he does have better control, he just has more. He also has a lot more to control, so his constant level of output is probably similar to what it was in canon. He just has a lot more that he can actually dig into. He begins fighting with Kenpachi. They begin clashing their blades against one another, and it rattles him just how powerful this guy is. Initially, he tries just fighting with his smaller blade, beating Renji and Ikkaku, two lieutenant level individuals. Kind of gave him a big head, but now that he's facing against a captain, it's kind of rattling him the sheer disparity of power in between a lieutenant and a captain. So yeah, he does end up breaking out both of his blades, and he begins hacking away at Kenpachi, and then Kenpachi gives him the free body shot, and he can feel it when he strikes against Kenpachi with all of his strength. He can barely get his blades to nudge him. They do sink a little into his skin, but they don't actually break skin. They just kind of seep in, like when you just slowly press a blade and you pull away before you cause it to bleed. He kind of leaves that kind of sensation against Kenpachi's skin, and he's like, I was expecting so much more than just that. You couldn't even leave me with something as pathetic as a paper cut, honestly. And he Ichigo notices that from his own hands they're shaking, and when he kind of adjusts his grip, he notices that blood is leaking from his own hands. His striking against Kenpachi rattled him and his blades and his hands so bad that just trying to strike against him caused his hands to bleed. So he's like, ah, crap, I'm fucked. So Kenpachi does end up stabbing through his crossing of Zangetsu. And here, rather than just a sole motivational speech from the old man, he gets an absolute dress down from White. He mocks him, telling him that he got way too overconfident against Renji. He still had to pull his ass out of the fire. He decided to sheath him and rely only on the old man. He needs to remember that he's fighting for his life. He's fighting. He needs to remember what he's fighting for. Or is it just not worth it? Is it all just some kind of game that he could speed run through? Is that what this is? Does he think he's some kind of max level character? No, he's a newbie, and he needs to get good. And yeah, obviously probably the cringiest dialogue, but in a sense it kind of makes sense. Ichigo's a little too confident in his power after taking down 2 lieutenant levels with just his Shikai. Um, so yeah, he needs to kind of get off his high horse and stop pretending like he's already king of the damn world. He's not. He's nowhere close. If he wants to get there, he's gonna have to live through this battle, unless he just wants to go ahead and hand over the controller. He can take care of him if he wants. And Ichigo says, no, I can do this. Give me one more chance to fight, and I'll take this guy down. And White for a moment is silent, and so is the old man, before the old man looks to White and gives him a bit of a look. He's like, okay, let's go on ahead and give him his chance. And White scoffs, turns away towards Kenpachi, and they both fade into, they kind of fade away. The world returns to normal, and Ichigo stands tall, both of his blades, and his Ryatsu is bursting. It is a mix of whitish blue and whitish red. Like, it's mainly white with tints of red and blue flickering against one another. It's a pretty impressive display. Kenpachi, of course, decides to give Ichigo another shot. And that's a little bit of his mistake as Ichigo begins to tear into Kenpachi's body, cut after cut after cut after cut after cut after cut after cut, and he eventually finishes it off with a nameless Getsuga from his smaller blade. And he prepares himself. He begins spinning his larger blade and tries to charge in the Getsuga Tencho from it, but his concentration is broken when Kenpachi reveals himself. Big old gash from the nameless Getsuga, and he's already peeled off his eye patch, and his body bursts with Ryatsu. And this kind of gets Ichigo's attention. He's like, okay, I'm gonna need you both to back me up here. Otherwise, I'm probably gonna die for real. And this gets both of his Zanpakuto spirits' attention. And the old man is calm and collected, but White is ecstatic. He's like, finally, we're finally fighting properly. Alright, Ichigo, let's do this. Let's show this guy what we're made of. And this time he stops the spinning, grasps onto larger Zangetsu. He pulls them both into the air, crosses them together, and his Ryatsu explodes. And so does Kenpachi's. Kenpachi has that manifestation of his golden Ryatsu, whereas Ichigo, behind him, manifests that same skull, that same hollow-like mask of blue and white, and now red Ryatsu all mixing together. And he ends up calling out the name of his strongest technique at this point, Getsuga Jujisho. And it's enough to plow through Kenpachi's attack and set him down for good. Not killing him, but it's enough to properly knock him out. put him out of commission for this battle. Um, Ichigo himself is absolutely drained, but he looks down at his body. He ends up collapsing to his knees. He's holding himself up with the larger half of Zangetsu, and he's holding the smaller Zangetsu against his chest. As he looks down and he notices blue vein-like markings across his body, he's like, "What? What is this?" And he can hear Old Man Zangetsu's voice in his head, saying that they will speak of this. He promises that, but right now is not that time. He needs to rest and retreat. Ichigo ends up collapsing onto his back. He talks with Kenpachi for a little bit, and he's a little conscious when Yoruichi shows up, but he does end up passing out when the world seemingly begins to blur. Eventually, he'll wake up in the cave. A lot of the other fights, they're still all going down the same. We're still kind of focusing on Ichigo, but Kenpachi still decides to be Kenpachi and he rebels. Um, and ends up beginning his Ichigo begins his Bankai training, and this is where things really begin to change, because we're not giving Ichigo Bankai that quickly. No, that's not happening. He knows, like he tries to charge into Bankai training, but when he saps both of his blades into the training doll to manifest his two Sanpakuto spirits, Yoruichi is kind of frozen when she notices that one of them is very clearly the representation of his hollow powers. And she's a little tense. You know how she's a little tense. She's kind of prepared for battle, but both she and Ichigo are kind of taken off guard when they both, in unison with stern frowns on their faces, say that Ichigo just straight up isn't ready for Bankai. Yoruichi kind of expected this, but of course Ichigo blows up. He needs that power. But White tells him to, once again, get off his goddamn high horse. He doesn't demand anything from them. Alright, that's not how this works. Besides, did he even think that he was anywhere close to mastering his Shikai? Does he think he doesn't have more to learn about this power, about the powers he already has? Does he think he's already at level 100? No. He has a lot more training to do before he's ready to move on to Bankai, let alone to be considered a master of a Shikai. He has a lot more training to do. And the old man agrees. He says that they will not be giving him access to Bankai. That's out of the question. But they will help him grow stronger. And they've now been presented with the perfect opportunity. So they begin sparring, and rather than, while the old man Zangetsu does break out the reigning of Zangetsus, White is a little different. At first he kind of relaxes. He lets the old man take over the first day, and the first day of Bankai training is very similar to what we saw in canon. He's given a whole bunch of fake Zangetsus. This time they're a little different in design to make it look like to make them look a little bit more like the true Zangetsus. How at one point he wields a fake Zangetsu that looks like the original Zangetsu that we saw, the first Shikai. He says, the old man says that within this valley of blades is his own blade, and Ichigo needs to find it in order to learn the truth of his power, the truth of the old man, and the truth of that ability that he made use of at the end of his fight with Kenpachi. And at first he thinks he's talking about the Getsugo Jisho, and he's like, isn't it just two Getsugas? But old man Zangetsu tells him to focus. That's not what he was talking about. He knows what he was talking about. And Ichigo gets a little bit more serious as they're flying across the battlefield, crossing blades with one another. And he's like, yeah, those blue veins, what were they? And he says, if you can find the true me and defeat me, I will tell you. So that's his first day, and that's his motivation for the first day of Bankai training. Eventually, throughout the night we had the same fights: Kenpachi versus Tosin and Komamura, Ikaku versus Iba, Yumichika versus Hisagi, and then we get to the second day. Uh, Renji ends up dipping after training for a little bit. He dips with his Bankai, with his false Bankai, which both which White Zangetsu kind of subtly comments on, but doesn't say anything outright, which kind of gets Yoruichi's attention, but she ends up refocusing on Ichigo's training after Renji leaves. She's like, whatever, as long as he's not doing anything too suspicious. But eventually, at the beginning of the second day, the seemingly passive, hollow-fied version of Ichigo breaks out into a manic grin and declares that it's his turn now. The old man can sit back and watch. And so he jumps out and begins his own battle against Ichigo. This time it's a little different. Rather than just the field of various Zangetsus, they both draw out their own version of his Shikai blade. So White has the hollowified version that we know of from the manga. So it's the large white cleaver, and Ichigo draws out his own black version, and they begin having a similar battle to what we saw during the visor training. It's just as intense and dangerous, although they don't break out into Bankai. And White shows off a whole bunch of different techniques. In response to Ichigo's flash step, he shows off the Sonido. In response to Ichigo's attempt at a Getsuga, he shows off a black Getsuga. It says that there's a lot more where that came from, as he breaks their blade lock and blurs out of view. Ichigo's looking around trying to figure out where he is, only for him to reappear with a glowing red fist as he socks him in the face, proclaiming Bala. And that kind of gets Ichigo's attention. He's like, what the hell is a Bala? He's like, if you really want to know, you're going to have to beat me. And so they continue battling against one another. And near the end of it, Ichigo attempts to finally get a hit in on White Zangetsu. And White lets it land, and it doesn't do anything. It creates sparks against his skin. He's like, what the hell is going on? How are you able to do that? He was like, I knew Kenpachi could do that, but how are you able to do that? Aren't you a part of me? How do you have so much greater strength than me? And White mocks Ichigo for his ignorance. He doesn't know anything, but he will. By the end of this day, he's going to learn the truth. He promises that. And they begin locking blades again, and near the end of the day, Ichigo's like, we don't have time for this. Ruki's about to be executed, because it is execution day. He's like, we don't have the time for this. I need to help Rukia. And out of nowhere, Old Man Zangetsu appears with all of the fake Zangetsus appearing once more. He's like, how are you going to be able to save Rukia as you are now? And Ichigo's like, well, I'd probably be able to if you guys actually helped me, but it seems like you're just trying to kill me. And White says, we are trying to kill you. Or at least, we are trying to kill you. Killing you this way is better than letting you get killed by trying to charge against all of Soul Society. Really, what were you thinking, Ichigo? What made you think you were strong enough to do that? And Ichigo begins battling against the both of them, only having one Zangetsu at this moment, but he doesn't think it's enough. So he begins drawing on the fake Zangetsus, and he begins trying to do everything he can to survive. And eventually he finds the other, the smaller Zangetsu, the true one, and he is able to cross them both to keep both of his spirits at bay. And he asks them just what is it that they want. And they both respond in unison with very different looks on their faces, but both completely heartfelt. That they want to protect Ichigo. They want to protect him from the world. They want to protect him from himself, his own stupidity, his arrogance, and his own earnestness, his eagerness to try to protect those that he does not have the power to protect. And he says, well, if you would give me that power, then I could protect them. We could work together, and we don't have to keep fighting like this. And they say that they don't have the same intentions as Ichigo does. They don't really care about protecting anyone else other than Ichigo. with White saying that he needs to, in order for him to stay alive, Ichigo needs to stay alive, and if he needs to take control for that to happen, then he'll do it. Whereas the old man says that in order to, he wanted Ichigo to stay ignorant of this life, as if he tries to charge down this path of continuously growing stronger in order to protect his friends from greater and greater threats. Eventually, he'll meet a threat that he cannot overcome, and when he fails, he will be filled with despair. And that is the last thing he wants for Ichigo to happen. He'll protect Ichigo by any cost, but if Ichigo wants to fight, he has to prove that he has the strength, not just of power but of will, in order to succeed. And Ichigo says that he understands. It takes him some time, a little, maybe a few more minutes of fighting, but he understands that their priority is him. That's why he won't fail. That's why he needs them to back him up. He needs them by his side. He needs to trust that his blades will always be enough to defeat any enemy before him. And that if they need to trust him, he promises. He swears he'll never fail them. And this gets both of their attention as they say that if he really wants to prove himself, he needs to show it right here and right now. They both begin charging powerful Getsugas with White's being black and red, and the old man's being white and blue. And looking at them, he accepts. Fine. He'll show them just how strong he is. And he begins charging up his own Getsuga Jujisho to meet them. He charges forward, and there's an explosion within the training grounds. Yoruichi has, at this point, kind of retreated to the far ends, and she's damn near ready to just hop out. But, after the dust clears, Ichigo's left standing there, alone. Or so it seems. He's gazing down at both of his blades, and he says that he understands. He won't lose. He promises. Eventually, we shift our focus over to Sokyoku Hill. We get into the execution. The Sokyoku is released. The giant flaming chicken bird is sent towards to execute Rukia, and suddenly it is stopped, and it is thrown back with a great amount of force. It is left staggering in the air, and Ichigo is standing before her. He's a bit bandaged up, pretty hurt, not in the best shape, but he looks more confident than she's ever seen him. And somehow she knows. Despite her protests, she knows Ichigo's going to get her out of this. And she smiles. Ichigo, he gets on the stand, he breaks it, catches Rukia, sends her to Renji, and now Ichigo is ready to face off against Byakuya. This is where the fight is going to also diverge. We're going to have our next big diversion because Ichigo doesn't have Bankai, because he's not really going to need it. So, Ichigo begins his battle against Byakuya. Now, he does still fold the lieutenant. I think it was Isane, Sosakibe, and Omaida. I think that's his name, the big guy, who somehow is Soifung's lieutenant. He's able to take them all down with ease. And he has his rematch with Byakuya. He shows off his dual Sanpakuto, and Byakuya is admittedly somewhat impressed. He never could have expected that a Ryoka, that a human from the human realm, could have ever had the potential for such a rare type of Sanpakuto. Before him, there's only been 2 individuals with dual wield Sanpakutos. So he has to admit he's somewhat curious, but nevertheless, Ichigo is going to fail here. He will win. He will kill Ichigo Kurosaki for interfering in the matters of Soul Society. Jesus Christ! Wow, that was a bit of a tongue twister. Try saying that 5 times fast. So they begin their battle against one another, and Ichigo's speed is out of this world. He's damn near as fast as he was in Bankai and Canon, and things begin to get a little weird for Byakuya when occasionally he can't help but swear that he's hearing the sound of static. He's somewhat familiar with the normal song, with the normal sound of just flash step, but this weird static that occasionally fills his ears is somewhat off-putting. He's never really heard it before, and every single time he hears it, Ichigo Ichigo becomes just a little bit faster. What he doesn't know is that Ichigo is using this battle, as training. He's using it to familiarize himself with the techniques he saw. He begins to get that much faster throughout the battle. He's tearing through Senpou and Sakura. And eventually he does force Byakuya to awaken his Bankai. He makes use of his Bankai, Senpou and Sakura Kageyoshi, and he thinks he has it completely under wraps. But what he doesn't expect is to not even be able to pierce Ichigo's skin. Of course, he's not going all in. He's using the bare minimum of his power in Bankai, which is still greater than his Shikai, but it's still the bare minimum. And he expected that he would have just been able to kill Ichigo, but Ichigo is standing there with almost no cuts whatsoever. His bandages have been torn off, and his older wounds have been reopened. But he notices faint blue lines across his chest that stop them from bleeding any further. And he's confused. What is this? What is going on? What kind of powers does this Ryoka have? Ichigo is unknowingly, he doesn't know the name of these techniques yet, but he is making use of both Blood Vein and Hiero, or Iron Skin, that the Hollows, or specifically the Orankar, have. So he's able to stop the bleeding from his reopened wounds, as well as defend himself from gaining any new ones. Of course, that was just the taste of Byakuya's Bankai. So from there on out, it becomes a lot more difficult. He instead focuses on getting even faster, moving and gliding across the air and the entirety of the battlefield. Occasionally, that buzzing sound, it just grows more and more frequent. And at the same time, Ichigo is getting faster and faster, blitzing through Byakuya's use of Bankai, and occasionally getting in close, landing glancing blows and cuts against his skin. He's not as confident. He's been knocked off his high horse. This time he's really fighting for real in comparison to his canon self, who let Byakuya get away. Jesus Christ. Whoa. I hate having pets. Their fur gets everywhere. But yeah. Here, rather than just showing off, putting his blade against his neck only to pull back, he's landing proper cuts and blows, and each and every single cut is getting more and more powerful, getting more and more dangerous. At first, it's just shallow cuts, one or two across his face, maybe across his arms, but eventually he gets a little bit more precise. He cuts across his hand, trying to disable his hand movements. He's trying to get at his wrists, maybe his shoulders and joints and elbows. He's trying to land cuts against his thighs to cause him to try to fall over. They're not deep enough, not yet, but they're getting closer and closer to being proper debilitating cuts, to being proper blows that might just actually kill him, or at the very least debilitate him for the rest of this battle. And Byakuya does decide to get a little bit more serious. He manages to corner Ichigo up close during a small, a brief lull in the battle. They're both getting pretty exhausted. Ichigo has decided to stop after noticing how exhausted Byakuya is, and is briefly focusing entirely on trying to upkeep his blood vein. Again, he doesn't know the name of the technique quite yet, but he is trying to focus on it. This is when both of his Zanpakuto spirits decide to give him a little bit of a breather, with the old man telling him that he'll focus on keeping his bleeding from getting any worse. He'll keep him from bleeding out. For now, he just needs to put the rest of his focus on this battle. And White tells him that, yeah, he's doing a lot better than he thought, but unless he wants him to take this win from him, he's gonna have to put this guy down for good. But Ichigo says that that's not his style. That's not how he wants things to be done, and he will get things done his way. That he promises. This gets a little brief moment of silence before White tells him, "All right then, we'll see how things go your way. Just remember, I'm always here to help." And of course, there's a little something sinister to it, but there's also something genuine that Ichigo feels, and he reciprocates, saying, "Yeah, thanks. I'll be waiting." And and this gets White to kind of chuckle, and he responds right back at you. "Be waiting until you mess this up." As they're having this little back and forth, Byakuya is able to set up the final stage of his Bankai. I don't even remember what it's called. But basically, he sets up all the pink glowing swords, and he's able to keep Ichigo from leaving. And Ichigo is he's not able to make use of his speed as much anymore. He begins to struggle against Byakuya. He's holding his own. He's making use of the darts technique, and yeah, that is what it's called when White Zangetsu would spin around Zangetsu, the blade with the ribbon, or with the chain in Bankai. It's called darts. So yeah, he begins to make use of that to kind of deflect some of them at first. Other times he tries to rely on Iron Skin, but he's not that good at it. So maybe they'll kind of bounce off if they graze him, but if they actually land full on, they'll begin piercing him. And eventually he does kind of get pinned down in a similar manner. And rather than trying to completely struggle, he asks White. He asks him for help. He says, "Can you help me deal with this guy? We need to take him down, not out." And White responds, "Fine. Guess we're doing this together." And White comes out. He begins manifesting his hollow masks, but curiously enough, only one of his eyes is blackened. Only one of his eyes has changed. His left eye, the part where the mask covers the most, with four red lines on the top, that's where his eye has changed. But on the right side, his eye is still the same normal brown. And Ichigo begins to get a lot stronger. He feels it. He feels the increase in strength. He can feel the power flowing through him. And he's kind of ecstatic about it. Wow, he really does still have a long way to go. This is only a little bit. He can tell. He can feel it. White isn't giving him everything. In exchange for somewhat pulling back and not giving White full control, White has decided to not give him full control either, and isn't giving him access to all of his power that he has left in reserve. But even this little bit is enough to turn the tide of the battle. Here they begin working together, and both Ichigo and Byakuya notice that the larger blade that belongs to White, that Ichigo at least knows belongs to White, is beginning to, whiten. It's beginning to bleach itself. It's turning from black to white, and specifically along the edge of the blade. And as he charges up a Getsuga, he realizes that there's no need to charge it. It practically needs no charge time at all. He just swings, and the black Getsuga comes forth, and is able to completely plow through all of Byakuya's attempt at defenses and offenses, and is able to leave him with a large gash across his body. And when Ichigo notices this, he's able to pump the brakes. It's a little difficult, but he's able to talk White into dissipating, and he's able to freely pull off the mask, and it dissipates into nothingness. Or so he thinks, not noticing that the white particles briefly circle back into his body and clear up all of his current wounds. At least the most egregious of them. Small cuts that Blood Vein can still take care of, thanks to the old man Zangetsu. He also notices that the white has completely dissipated from the blackness of his blade. It's completely back to normal. And Byakuya says, "I'm not really gonna ask what that was. I would just say that let's go on ahead and have one final clash against one another." And Ichigo says, "Yeah, I'm down for that." He crosses his blades and unleashes a Jujisho against Byakuya's Senkei. And Byakuya, by the way, is just overall in worse shape. And yeah, their clash ends similarly to as in canon, because Ichigo is a lot more exhausted from trying to test out some techniques the way that he did, being so reckless. So their battle ends, and Aizen ends up making his appearance. And rather than completely just stopping Ichigo and just cleaving through his spine the way that he did, just I think that's what he did. He just kind of cut through his spine somehow, um, and left him with that big old injury. Um, he is still able to get the cut just as deep because even with both of his Zanpakuto spirits trying to not let that happen, trying to buff up his defenses, Aizen is able to actually land that blow. Although um, nobody really notices, but Aizen's own eyes kind of widen in response to the resistance that he felt. He's surprised. Ichigo has grown a lot more than he could have expected, and he's curious. He can't wait to see how much farther Ichigo's going to come. And he actually notices the as he pulls away and ends up retreating, he can see through Ichigo's Shihakusho, his robes. He can see that the flesh is not only, it's painted with his own blood, but he can see the faint glowing blue lines across his back. And he can see very, very slowly, but he focuses. He makes use of his abilities to enhance kind of his vision, to just narrow in. He can see it. It's healing very, very slowly. Yes, he is very interested in just how far Ichigo is going to exceed his expectations. So they end up spending the week to recover. Ichigo gets his Substitute Soul Reaper badge, and that is the end of the Substitute Soul Reaper arc with the invasion into Soul Society. So yeah, I think I'm going to go on ahead and leave off part 1 there. I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump into recording part 2 and cover the Arrancar arc. But yeah, I'll see. We'll see. So if you liked, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Check the description for any art that I may use in the thumbnail. We'll see in a moment. But yeah, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't. Be sure to leave constructive criticism only. I don't really want any haters unnecessarily hating on me, because really I know I'm crap at this, but you're just wasting everyone's time pointing out the obvious. But please, if you do have any kind of constructive criticism, or if you want a series you'd like me to cover instead, a different type of what if topic, go on ahead and let me know. Leave it in the comments and I'll give it a look. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a good day and a good time. Goodbye.